First speaker is Hywel from the City of Boroondara. Hywel is responsible for the Try Walking Principal Pedestrian Network Demonstration Project in Camberwell. He'll outline the infrastructure and targeted behaviour change campaign that increase walking participation and reduce car use. He is an experienced international transport strategist researcher. The Try Walking project won the ITE's Sustainable Transport Award in 2014. Please welcome Hywel.
For those who don't know, Camberwell is about 8 kilometres east of Melbourne CBD. There's about 8,000 people employed there, and it's mainly a retail and kind of employment offer that's there, plus kind of leisure and services. So what it is, the aims of the project were really to kind of increase walking participation, but also to try and influence a mode shift away from car use for the immediate community. But it was also, in terms of objectives, also to trial a methodology developed by the state government and to deliver infrastructure and a behaviour change programme. This just gives you a very broad outline of what the project was doing, from a very strategic foundation and a starting point, and that was mainly the modelling, to research component, and then the design and delivery of the project, and eventually the evaluation. But the evaluation, we really thought about that from the onset in terms of when we were setting up the aims, in terms of what we could actually measure, how we could actually measure that, and what we needed to measure before we even started anything. This is the modelling. What it essentially does, it actually maps every individual within the surrounding community for a distance of about 1 kilometre, and then aggregates all those lines, those shortest paths, in terms of the most direct route for members of the community. And then we went out and kind of walked those routes. What we also did as well was we did a lot of pedestrian counts in the centre, and those counts actually created a cordon around the outside of the centre, outside the main car parking areas. That's not to say that some people didn't park kind of outside those areas and walk in, but they'd be walking a bit of a distance to come into the centre. We around that cordon, we actually had about 15,000 trips, pedestrian trips coming in and out to that cordon each day. And I think the value of that is understanding kind of the sheer volume of pedestrian movement that occurs there that you don't really see. You see 15,000 cars, they make a lot of noise, they smell a lot, and they're very visual, but you don't see so much kind of 15,000 people moving around. One of the first things we did with that information was actually compare the number of people that the model was saying should be walking along these corridors, and the number of walking trips which are actually occurring there. Now, they're not directly comparable. You're not expecting what you get from the model to represent what your the actual numbers that you're counting. But what it does do is it tells you which corridor is actually relatively low in comparison to the population that lives out in that direction. And then you can sort of create these factors and just see which ones are lower than others, and therefore is there some big latent demand that you can tap into if you deliver improvements and you encourage people to walk. We also went and did questionnaire surveys at the heart of the centre, asking people how they got there, how much they spent, why they travelled there. About 20% of people who had actually walked in, and then the remaining came by train. About half came in by car. But we also asked people, could they have used another mode of transport that day other than what they'd actually used? And about 20% of motorists actually indicated, yes, I could have actually walked that day, or I could have used tram that day. Likewise with the tram, about 20% indicated they could have walked rather than jump on the tram. So when we do all the maths about this, we basically come out with about a 32% mode share. That's the potential from that simple survey. So there's a good over 50% increase that can actually happen there. In terms of the value of pedestrians, they visit the most often, and over a period of the year, if you sort of do the sums, they actually spend the most in the centre. So they're really valuable individuals to look after in terms of the retail of the centre. The next thing we did was really look into the research of how do we actually encourage people to walk. We actually put aside a lot of the good practice notes that you see kind of floating around, and we went back to academia and looked at studies that said, well, in this strait we delivered trees, and the trees resulted in X number of extra people walking. So we went back and looked at different measures we could introduce, and also the same goes with sort of behaviour initiatives, what was actually working in different environments. So our modelling and our audits flagged that there were two corridors that had the potential to increase walking participation, but also had the potential to actually improve. And I'll talk about Cookson Street to start with. It connects all the right places, your train stations, the shops, schools, park, etc. So why didn't we see more people kind of walking along that corridor? Mainly because a lot of the desire lines where people actually wanted to walk, and it could be a matter of just the other side of the road, they were poorly catered for. So a lot of people walked on the south side of Cookson Street, very narrow path, and that path ran out or meandered all over the place. And what we did, we brought in sort of a new path, a wide path, which shows a 2.5 metre path. The reason being, you can walk side by side comfortably, have a chat, and someone can pass the other way. There's no need to sort of drop in single file. It becomes a lot more comfortable environment. When we first went out to design, we flicked it out, said design us a footpath along here. They put a footpath in on the drawings and took out every tree down the entire road. And the trees are a real asset to that environment. I mean, there's a beautiful tree there. What if we ripped that out? Wouldn't it look the same? It wouldn't have the character. So we really maintained as much of the character that was of value along there as we could. We worked around that. Likewise, there were telegraph poles there. They cost 10 to 30,000 to sort of move around. But we can better spend that money elsewhere. People aren't going to change their travel habits just because you've moved a telegraph pole. And then kind of further along, the path just ran out, and people typically took the shortest route and kind of walked around the road, as you see here. And most of the cars tracked well outside that area, so it was kind of wasted space. We have to be a bit careful here because there are train replacement services, bus services that come around here periodically, so we had to make sure that you could still navigate this street. So just to take you through on a little journey through that path, you can see the 2.5 metre path all the way along here. All this path didn't exist previously. We kept it going. We worked around those telegraph poles and parking meters. We kept as much of the tree assets as we could in existing landscaping, and we supplemented that landscaping to improve it. And that takes you into Camberwell Station. The corridor itself actually goes out much further than that. We actually pushed those corridors out to about 1.2 kilometres and delivered improvements along the entire length. So it was things like lighting and regular seating and landscaping. We did that all the way, a whole of corridor approach. So this was another section of it. But we didn't do this where it is. It's a challenge because you've got about 2,000 cars kind of head north and south up this corridor in a peak hour. It's a car every 2 seconds. To cross each arm of this, one of these kind of, to cross each arm here, you need 4 seconds as a pedestrian to do it comfortably on each arm. You've got 2 seconds to do it. So what you see out there, and we did a video survey of this, is people darting between cars, trying to get across. Now when you start to consider that 30 to 40% of that community just along that corridor are actually 60 years and over, or was it 50? 50 years and over, we start to realise this isn't really a conducive environment to encourage people to walk. So we still have this to go back and try and improve. And the problem with it is it's also a key traffic route, so it's very difficult to kind of do something positive for pedestrians when it has a key traffic function as well. Camberwell Road Corridor, again, it connects all the right places, schools, parks, library, shops, etc. So why aren't there more people kind of walking along this corridor? We looked at raised side road crossings initially just through a study that was done in London, Transport for London, looked at side road crossings in terms of their benefits to pedestrians, this particular safety side of it. We were still a little unconvinced, so we did some of our own digging around because we knew we had quite a few of these raised side road crossings and they'd been there for a while. And we had enough of them to actually go and look at those crash stats 5 years before and 5 years after they were introduced. And what we found is, and this is kind of an aggregate kind of number, but over 16 crossings we had 11 crashes 5 years before they were introduced. 5 years after, we've only had 2 crashes at those locations. What's also really evident is there's a change in behaviour. Now we want to quantify that. It's another piece of work we've been trying to quantify that change in behaviour at those locations. We know how we're going to do it. It's going to take a bit of time watching those videos. But you can see that the behaviour of motorists has changed. They've slowed. They're a bit more considerate. In a way, you've introduced a very short area of shared space that provides a bit of uncertainty for drivers. So they're a bit more cautious. It's not their space completely anymore. And that has kind of changed the way that pedestrians use it and also changed the way that motorists use that space. Trees, love trees, and did a lot of digging on trees, and we had a bit of a debate with Vic Roads, and I have to commend Vic Roads on their recent tree planting policy because it actually talks about the benefit of trees and recognises their value within the urban environment. But they not only encourage physical activity, so if you want to encourage walking, get some trees in, also cycling they encourage. They also act as a traffic calming treatment. They actually bring speeds down. Traffic adjusts because maybe it's a sense of enclosure, but for some reason they get a sense that there's something else going on here. But the battle we had with that was about clear zones and the fact that trees are kind of considered crash risk because they're an object that can be hit. Seating, we introduced seating along both these corridors. Certainty of seating for older people with mobility is really quite important. In terms of spacing of seating, there's actually not a lot out there, and it differs from person to person in terms of their mobility needs. We also introduced wayfinding signs. There's even a heads-up sort of mapping here for children to get involved, so they get kind of a representation of what's on top and there, but we picked out the real kind of bits of what's happening in the community. And the main reason we really did the wayfinding side of things was to inform people how close things were, how easy or short it was to walk there. These signs we put in the community, but they know where the shops are. We don't need to point them towards the shops, but we do need to tell them that it's only a 15-minute walk. So these were more behavioural. There's more of a behavioural objective behind these signs. Car share, we still haven't got these in yet, but within the rest of Bundara where we've got car share in place, car share seems to promote walking. People state that they now walk more since they've joined the car share scheme. In terms of the behavioural change, what we wanted to do with this was really to encourage people to walk, but also to flag the infrastructure that was being delivered, to say, look, we're improving this environment because we really believe in walking and we're making an investment and improving things for yourself. The behavioural elements we're really keen into was more around sort of fun, freedom, incentives, social norming. That figure of 15,000 people walking in and out of Camberwell Junction, we used that as a headline to say, look at everyone walking out there, this is what everyone's doing. And then habits, we did that through a mobile phone device, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But there was a set of design principles under those as well, and that was more to do with the messages we shaped. Things like avoid being anti-car, but we still wanted to sort of pick out a little bit in terms of driver frustrations. Social norming comes in there as well. But you know, the messages we've gone to do is affect a small change. Just do a little change once a week. Walk a little bit more. So the pilot round was along the Crookston Street corridor because we finished the infrastructure along that corridor first. So we developed a whole series of collateral and pamphlets, and we had a kind of a little bit of a party in the park and free coffee and all of those cakes called cupcakes, yeah. We kind of advertised prizes. We created the orange sign there. We put those out in the community for the 12-week program, and we had them up on telegraph poles all over the place. Only temporarily, because they're only effective for a short period, but they kind of gave the message of something going on, and also provided them a link to the website. The app we used at the time was Map My Walk, but it really didn't work very well. It was kind of clunky. You had to switch it on every time you wanted to go and log your walk, and we didn't get a great take on that. Also, our prizes, we focused a lot more on money and discounts at shops, and that really didn't resonate with our community. Not that interested in saving a little, but they were interested in health. So in terms of the outcome, we found it hard to actually motivate people to kind of walk more, but we did get an increase along that corridor in terms of walking participation. Second round, we knew we needed to change things. We were focusing this time on the Camberwell Road corridor. We just finished the infrastructure. We needed to change the app. The app wasn't working for us at all. So we partnered with Bupa Ground Miles, or Bupa, and they have this app called Ground Miles. Runs in the background, really friendly to use. We also focused far more on the health benefits of walking, and we did keep a financial component in there called a lottery of regret. And what this is, we pull a prize out of a hat, and we've got a name. If they've logged their walks that week, we give them a prize. If they don't, we pull another name out of the hat. And if that person's walked, they get the prize. But the email that goes out actually says then that who won it, but also who missed out on that prize because they hadn't walked that week. So that was the lottery with regret, and it seemed to resonate with people. The Ground Miles app had all the gamification we wanted, and it had a fantastic leaderboard. It's unbelievable how competitive people get with leaderboards. Forget health, give them a leaderboard, and they're out there walking, trying to rack up their marks. And you could see people jostling for positions day after day. And it really worked. But it was an easy app to use. Once you'd switched it on, it kind of ran in the background, and it knew the difference between kind of one walk, standing around like this, or going up and down, and actually going off and having a good walk. Second time round, big change, big difference. We now have 500 people checking out our website, a lot more people receiving emails, but we have 52 people regularly using the app and getting competitive with each other. So in terms of how kind of the outcome, again I stress trying to design your evaluation from the onset, from day one, thinking about how am I going to measure this. It's really important. And then if there's other opportunities for measuring things along the way, you can just add them to that as well. So in the short term, when we were actually running the behaviour campaigns on these different corridors, these were the increases. Now I've highlighted the ones in red because really they're more reflective of the audience we were trying to change, behaviour with the local community. So they're more likely to be walking around on Saturday, going to the shops, going for a coffee, etc. Whereas the kind of weekday ones, although they're still important, They're more the people who, they're a mix of people, not just the community, but also people kind of employed in the area. We had a big 100% increase along Hywel Road when we were around the campaign there. That's actually 1,100 extra people over a 12-hour period, on a weekday period. And then on the Saturday it was about 350 extra people. In the long term, the pilot program, the one on Cookson Street, in the weekday, that's kind of reverted back to where it was in base conditions. And that was the less successful kind of behaviour initiative. But if you look at the weekend figure, the Saturday figure, that's still that. That's our local community is still walking out a fair bit more than it did initially. On the second round of the behaviour change, the try walking, when we had some massive increases along Hywel Road, and we sustained a fair proportion of those big increases as well. We also went out and we just went and we surveyed people. Have you heard of the try walking program? 17% said they had. Not great, but it's all right. But a third of people said they now walked more than they did a year ago, and a third of people said they now left their car at home more than they did a year ago. In terms of the map at the app, big difference. 750 kilometres walked, logged in a 12-week program with the pilot round. We had over 10,000 kilometres walked in the second round, so we're delighted for that. We also emailed our questionnaires, or emailed our try walking participants, and no surprises there. A lot of them said they now walk more than they do a year ago, and a good proportion kind of indicate they now drove less. So in summary, almost everyone is supportive of walking. Councillors, community, engineers, everyone wants to support people walking. We underestimate the scale and value of walking within the community. As soon as you get out there and you kind of gather this information, you actually see the scale of it. The modelling and the surveys really helped focus the project in terms of where we can get the most bang for our buck, which corridors really need to be improved. We learned a lot about behaviour change. I didn't know a lot about it before I started this programme. The project, importantly, demonstrated an increase in walking participation, and we had a clear change in behaviour amongst those who partook in the programme. And just to leave you with a little quote that we received. We received quite a few of these, but this is from Tish. I love listening to audiobooks while I walk. To me, Burundara has 100 good books reflected in its parks and leafy streets. Thank you very much.
Down in front of you.
Yes, you mentioned early on in your presentation that a lot of the modeling you did didn't really necessarily reflect the actual conditions. So can you kind of explain a little bit why that is? Like, what is that source of error?
There's no error. It's the fact that the GIS model is actually modelling population. So it's people living in that community. So you could say, well, it is representative if you think everyone's going to walk every day at least once to the centre and back, but that's not the case. But it gives you an idea of what the demand should be on those corridors if you compare them against each other. So if you then look at the number of people you've counted along each of those corridors, and you see, I've got a really big population out here, but we've got hardly anyone walking here, you kind of scratch your head and think, why is that? Does that need to be improved? Do we need to get people out of their cars? Do we need to address a safety issue along that corridor? Or is the lighting abysmal and no one walks there at night? So it kind of sort of flags where there's a disparity. So for me, it was about latent demand, identifying where there's a latent demand and an opportunity to increase the number of people walking.
Next question, Chris.
You've got some great outcomes, which is very good. Do you have an idea about the cost effectiveness? So how much the whole thing cost?
Yeah, there's a heat software online. World Health Organization have it online, anyone can look it up, and you can put in a few parameters in terms of kind of different values you've got to choose, how much that project actually cost, and what the change in walking you got is. What we don't really know is how long each of those walking trips are. We've just got absolute numbers. So you have to make a guess that maybe those trips are 400 metres-ish on average, or you can be conservative. And then that'll spit out some numbers in terms of your benefit cost ratios. And for these, they're up in the kind of dozens. I mean, some of the early ones put in, we had about BCR about 30 to 1. And then when we put really conservative figures in there, we were still getting 15, 20 to 1 anyway.
Hi, did you engage with your community in developing the plan from the beginning? Or did you have some champions along the way to help identify how to get people walking, or what are some of the motivational factors and what's very specific to that area?
We did. We definitely did. I kind of haven't covered everything we did in the project because I'm trying to squeeze it into about 20 minutes. But we did workshops. We let the community know in bulletins, and we asked them for their opinions. We did surveys to find out what they do and how we could improve things. And we also did workshops where we had a small group of individuals, and we walked along those corridors and asked them about those environments, how they feel, as well as what improvements they'd like to see. It's a bit of a challenging area because when we ask people in a questionnaire format, what would you like to see improved, it's very difficult to get any value out of it. Sometimes they'll say, oh, less built-up development. And you've asked them a question about how can we improve walking for you. Or they'll say, oh, improve the car parking so I don't have to walk. You get some really obscure kind of feedback, and it's not always that valuable. And even when you're walking with them and you're talking about how do you feel in the space and what you enjoy about the space and how can this be improved, there's actually quite limited. Quite often people don't know how it can be improved. Sometimes they do. Like you do get things like, I find it difficult to cross the road at this point, but they can't recall how good the lighting is there until they're there at night, standing there, and they suddenly occurs to them the lighting is poor. So it's actually quite challenging to get good feedback from the community. And when people write in about kind of how they'd like their walking environment improved, it's actually a bit of a rarity. Normally they just write in to complain about something.
The path that you increased to 2.5 metres wide, did you find that cyclists are doing it?
Look, occasionally there's a bike going down it, but the surveys we've done along Cookson Street have actually included bike movements, but all those bike movements seem to be occurring on the road there. It doesn't quite link up right for bikes. You still have trees kind of in the way and low branches, so it's substandard, and there's posts right next to it. So we don't have a lot of problem with it beyond what you normally see, occasional bike user on a footpath somewhere.
Hywel, I know a blind cyclist who uses it.
Okay.
Yeah, that is to highlight it's unfinished business, the roundabout.
Yes.
Unlike the rest of the road laws in Australia, where pedestrians actually have right of way on a roundabout, they don't. Just interested to see what your opinion would be about that.
In terms of the law is quite challenging in Australia at the moment. There's a lot of onus put on vulnerable road users and very little onus put on motorists. And I think there needs to be a better balance there. I think it might be a long way off before there's a lot of onus put on motorists, unfortunately. In terms of the road rules about roundabouts, roundabouts are challenging places for pedestrians. They are difficult. They're convenient because pedestrians generally delay less at a roundabout than at a traffic signal, because they go when there's an opportunity to go. And they know that they're not breaking any road rules, and they sort of dart across. But when you have roundabouts like that, huge challenge because the flow is ridiculous. Speed's not that much of an issue there. It's just finding the break in that traffic. But even watching how difficult it is to cross the road at that roundabout, there's motorists that understand that, and they actually do slow and stop and let people through. We've got 12 hours of footage showing so many motorists actually being considerate for people actually crossing there. So it's kind of interesting. We don't know what to do with it. We've had discussions with Vic Road. We're going to raise it again and see where we can take that.
So you give way signs on every direction coming in and out of a roundabout to force cars to slow down.
Paid crossings, for goodness sake.
I think we've got a big topic there. We'll just grab about one or two more questions. We'll have to move on. Yeah, got to the back.
Yeah, that roundabout is a problem for anyone on a cyclist. It's hopeless to try and cross there safely. Have you thought about using, say, a very low-profile, flat-top speed hump there that isn't, that just because of its design and the edging treatment, kind of looks like a pedestrian crossing, but isn't? They are said to be very effective at actually slowing motors.
I might say that we've got lots of ideas for it, but in terms of something that can be agreed with your Vic Roads, that's probably the challenge. It does have a traffic priority status under the Smart Roads arrangement, but so it also is a priority bicycle link as well. So it's about negotiation of what we can kind of change there with our state partners, really. There's some great Scandinavian examples of where you have a gentle road hump in, and then it smooths out kind of as you come out of that roundabout, and we have photos of that. But we just need to sort of gently see if we can make some change there. But we haven't been able to get to any agreement so far. I'm very aware of Port Phillip's kind of success with some of the treatments that they've done as well around roundabouts, having their crossing, like the zebra crossings right up next to the stop line, and that seems to be really successful in terms of crashes as well as the convenience of pedestrians. But it's a slightly different environment here because it is a priority traffic point.
One final question, lady at the back.
I was just curious with you mentioned with the surveys, 20% of people said that they could have walked. Were you just interested in the people who thought that they could walk, or did you also find out kind of, the people who could have walked, it was a walkable distance, but they didn't actually even realise that it was, just because they're so used to driving, they didn't realise it was only a kilometre?
Yeah, look, we just asked the simple question, could you have made that journey today by walking, and kept it at that. The reason being is distances people walk or are prepared to walk is very subjective in terms of personal experience, health, and the other thing is the trip purpose, whether they're going to the supermarket or not. It gets very complicated when you start to factor all those things, so we kept it really simple. Could you have made your journey today by walking, and used that as a measure. What you might note, though, is that measure that takes our mode share up to 32%. That doesn't seem a lot compared to some of the increases in walking that we had along some of those corridors. So it's kind of a mode share for the overall precinct rather than what you could affect in terms of change along a particular corridor can be very different and much higher.
Thanks very much, Hywel. Those are some good questions and good answers, so it is time to move on. You mentioned surveys, do a lot of surveys.
Yes.
We'll just do a very brief one here relating to our program. We love surveys too.